Hello, and thank you for joining. My name is Nadine Chaudhuri, and I'm the Supplier Diversity Manager at DentaQuest, one of today's sponsors.
Hello, and thank you for joining.
DentaQuest is a purpose-driven, one moment.
DentaQuest, one of today's sponsors.
Hello, and thank you for joining. DentaQuest. Sorry, I think I had some echo. I'm hoping that everything's okay now. So I'm joined today by Christie Lindor. Christie is a workplace culture and inclusion strategist and CEO of Tessi Consulting, a boutique consultancy focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, training, and coaching services. Christie has over 20 years experience as a management consultant for firms like IBM, Deloitte, and Ernst & Young. As an author, speaker, and Bentley University adjunct professor, her work on diversity, inclusion, and culture has been featured in publications such as the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Boston Business Journal. Welcome, Christie, and thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you so much, Nadine, and thank you to Boston Magazine for having me.
Yes, and thank you for all of you in the audience for joining. You know, it's certainly been a great day packed with content. And I just wanted to point out that for this session, we've actually kind of switched more from a panel format to more of a fireside chat. I do certainly want to allow for questions from the audience. So if you have a question for Christie, please post it in the chat at any time. And with that, I'll dive right in. So first, Christie, I would love to just hear about how you got here. What motivated you to leave your comfortable corporate job and start your own business?
Yeah, you know, as I think about that question, so many thoughts like flood into my head, but I'd first want to actually just start and say, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. Because as you just mentioned in my bio, I spent 20 years and pretty much my entire career at that time as a management consultant at large corporate firms. And so my mental map from the time I started my career until I decided to leave, it was really about becoming a partner at a large consulting firm. That to me was what success looked like. So it wasn't just, one thing that necessarily happened. It was a kind of a collection of different things that started to cue in that, this is a potential path for me. Three things that really happened that stood out, where I began to see a shift in what I considered success. I think the first thing is, as a management consultant, I remember the killing of Trayvon Martin, back in the back in the 2012 era. And I think for me, something happened with, that event. I started to really think about what I had already done in the work, what I had been in corporate. I, at the time, was first generation college professional, first generation corporate individual. So for me, it was just thinking, what am I doing to create impact in the spaces and the rooms that I was in? So that was the beginning of a shift in terms of a focus area. I had already been doing DEI work in consulting, for clients, but it really started to take a center stage for me. So that was the first thing. The second thing that happened, I decided that instead of just staying kind of in this generalist, doing diversity work, off and on, I really wanted to build a diversity practice inside a larger company. So I started to shop that idea around, and it wasn't really popular, even up until recently. I can take the last time I shopped that idea around, it was back in 2019. So again, not too long ago, where, DEI professionals can relate to this. We were really working upstream, right? In terms of really being able to draw the business case and get people to hone in and focus in on DEI. As an area to happen. And then the last thing that happened was the birth of my son. I started to really think about the conversations I would have with him when I was older. And I wanted to make sure that I can tell him to go after his dreams, take risks, go after your passion. And it made me start to reflect, how am I living that? How am I really being able to live the advice that I give him? And how can I be an example? And it was kind of all those things happened. So then fast forward, I took the plunge February 2019, literally a month before a global pandemic to start my company. So that was a very interesting time. And, between the pandemic and then the situations and the social unrest with George Floyd's murder, my business became a rocket ship, and, really excited to see like the growth we've had to date. So that's a long story, but that's really kind of the founding story of Tessi.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it is kind of a newer company, but looking at your website or different areas, you won't necessarily see that. So, since starting your company, what have you done to market yourself, and have you faced any, challenges in marketing or attracting large corporations?
So I think one thing that when you become an entrepreneur, that it really makes you take a hard look in the mirror on what are you good at and what are some things that you're not so good at. And I think starting to walk the entrepreneur path, I started to ask myself some really hard questions. I think the first thing is I knew that I had to lean on my strengths, which was working with larger corporations. I had spent 20 years doing that across over 30 plus industries. I have literally had exposure and experience navigating over 100 different companies. And so for me, I knew that would be where I can really blossom. So that was kind of from the beginning when I created my business plan. My business plan, by the way, I didn't go out and seek funding, but I did create like a 4-page business plan. So if you're thinking about starting a business, you don't necessarily need like a 20-page business plan to get started. Mine was literally like 4 pages where I've outlined it. But once I started, 2 challenges I saw that started to kind of take shape. Because I had so much experience, I had so many things I could do, I started off offering too much. And I would say for anyone interested in going into entrepreneurship, being really clear on what you offer, how you're different from others in the marketplace, how you really distinguishingly, uniquely add value is an important question to hone in on. I realized really quickly that you cannot be all things to all businesses. You really have to make decisions that are not from the ego, really, but really, not only from what others say, but really what in your heart, like where's that intersection of where your passion intersects with what the market needs, right? And what you're good at. So I realized that within the first 6 months of my business, I had to really narrow my focus. And once I did that, and I really honed in on the areas within DEI that I do, I saw my business exponentially grow. So that was the first challenge. And the second one, I'd say, is honestly, it sounds counterintuitive, but it's the ability to say no. I find that you have to run a business from a strength perspective. And that means you have to have confidence in saying, okay, if I know I get this work, will I be able to add value? Is this a client that I really want to work with? Do this client align with my own values? And being able to stay at that as a filter has become, for me, a pretty powerful differentiator, because not only are we really clear on what we offer, we also are really clear and can say no and walk away from. I've literally walked away from hundreds of thousands of dollars of business because there was a misalignment, and being clear on that. Once you have that sense of clarity and you are confident and you're leading your business from a place of strength and not fear, you become I think it's a really powerful place and really empowering.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And being on the other side of that, on the corporate side, having conversations with businesses such as yours, or, having that first contact, and initially, if a business reaches out, it might not look like it's a good fit, but when you can have that conversation and they tell you not just, what's on the website, but how they can specifically help you, how they're a match for you, or by you, I mean me, the corporation, that has really changed my perspective. And there's definitely been times where, initially I'm like, oh, this isn't a fit, but they were able to really showcase how they could benefit my corporation. And of course, as a supplier diversity professional, my primary focus is to, identify and act as that advocate for small and diverse companies, because we want to engage entrepreneurs such as yourself who can bring innovation and those outside perspectives. But what I really rely on is actually third-party certification to really identify those diverse-owned businesses and therefore, kind of measure the impact of our efforts. Many of you in the audience may not be familiar with diverse certification. So just a little background: to qualify as a diverse-owned business, they must be 51% owned and operated by someone who falls in one or more diverse categories. So that could be women-owned, minority-owned, LGBT-owned, and so on. Christie, I understand you've recently gone through the certification process. What led you to that decision to become certified, and did you encounter challenges?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that should really be thought of if you are an entrepreneur. Really going through any of these certifications, some of the ones you mentioned, there's a lot of other ones out there, is a really rigorous process. It not only it costs time in terms of your time, but also your money to really go through this effort. So I think it's something that, again, going back to that clarity of what you offer and, your ability to say no, it's also being able to come up with what is your target clientele. As I mentioned, I knew upfront that we were going to work with mid-market, and large organizations. That was a decision from day one that we made. And when I thought about and I did research on, how do these large organizations interface with smaller entrepreneurs, one thing was very apparent. They wanted a kind of almost like a pre-vetted list. They wanted that set of certification so that they don't have to have any doubts in their mind on your ability to deliver, your viability as a company. And so once I kind of figured that out, from day one, literally the day that I made the decision to start my company, I think literally that same day I started the certification process. And I've gone through a couple of different ones. I'm going through a couple different now. They all have different requirements, but it's pretty much the same. So if you've kind of gotten the chance to go through, whether it's with WeBank, if you've done an MBE certification, there's a lot of them, again, depending on how your company identifies and what types of organizations you want to work with. Depending on those, they kind of ask the same type of information. They ask around things like your financial records, your past. They want to know a little bit about your business. They want to understand your governance process. So again, once you've kind of packaged this and you say, you know what, I really want to work with large organizations. One thing that's interesting is that in addition to creating going through the certification process, the key distinction is actually building relationships with people like Nadine. So that was something that, again, because I had already worked in corporate, I kind of knew that it wasn't just having the certification, it was actually having those relationships, people knowing what I can do, connecting with buyers. So it's a two-step process. What you don't want to do is go through a certification process. You don't really know who your buyers are. You don't know how to connect with individuals, and you go through this really rigorous process that costs money, and then it just sits there. So you want to think about from day one, what's my goal? What type of companies am I targeting? And then once I get this certification, then what? Luckily for me, because I had, experience with corporations, I have a lot of connections, and most of my network are former colleagues that now are leaders at a lot of corporations. They were actually telling me, well, just let me know when you're certified so that we can bring you in. So for me, I was having different conversations. But there have been some organizations that's reached out to me and my company, and we didn't know them before. And they told us that we made the shortlist. We were differentiated because we did have the certification. So regardless or not, I think it's something you got to think about. Is this worth the time and effort if this is the type of client that you want to go after?
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of that has to depend on what space you're in. Obviously it made sense for you, but it might not make sense for everyone. I will say that, these different national certifying organizations, they have their own supplier diversity events, and you can also attend those events and make connections and meet corporations there. I've certainly sat on the other side of that table, and while there might not be an opportunity right away, when later on something comes to my attention, I'm going back to that list of people that I met. But also, just like Christie said, it's kind of can be very collaborative. I will say that on the supplier diversity professional side, the different companies, like we talk to each other as corporations, and it's really nice because it's not so much like there's secrets. We're always helping each other out. So oftentimes if I have an opportunity, I might just reach out to people and be like, hey, have you worked with anyone in this space? Like, do you have any suggestions? And yes, we're identifying companies other ways, but we're also being added to that list because they've worked with that company before because it came to their attention through certification. So it seems like I already know the answer to this question, but it sounds like being certified has helped you attract additional business. Is that correct?
I would say so. It's kind of a chicken before egg thing. It's helped us attract business, but that was also the type of business we were going after in the first place. And so, yes, for us, staying certified is an important kind of leverage and strategy for our business. Definitely.
All right. Well, I do definitely want to give people the opportunity. Does anyone have any questions for Christie? And I guess maybe while we wait for any comments to come through, do you have any sort of words of wisdom to anyone in the audience? Maybe they've been thinking about starting their own business for a while, but they haven't, taken that step.
So many thoughts with that question, Nadine. Now that I'm about 2 years, my company is going to be 2 years old in February, and now sitting on the other side of the fence here, I think individuals that may be on the fence, I was kind of going back and forth on the fence for years. So it wasn't, like I mentioned, it wasn't just one thing that happened. It was a couple of things that I heard ringing in my ears, and I was responding, not responding to. And then it just got to a point that it didn't make sense to not start my business and not give myself the chance. So I'd say for anyone that is on that fence can be really tough emotionally because you kind of go back and forth. I at least for me, I'm looking back and I'm like, wow, I wish I had actually done this years ago. And again, it was really me stopping myself. When I had worked through the numbers and that sort, I think there's always the fear of, am I going to be able to survive on my own as a business owner? So, right now, I have a team of close to 10 people. However, when I first started my business, it was just myself, myself, and I. And I realized that I actually don't need as much money as I thought I needed to be able to stay with, comfortable with my lifestyle, do everything I need to do and be able to start my business. I didn't realize I thought I needed more money than I actually did. And so I had that cushion, but I think for me, it was just knowing that, I don't need as much. So I say that to say, whatever your dollar amount you're making now, you may say, well, if only I can make sure that I can make that much to start my business, then I'll start it. I'll tell you now, start it. Go ahead and start it if this is something that is interesting. And I think one of the ways that I got myself over the leap is that I said, you know what, if for whatever reason this fails spectacularly, guess what? I can always go back and get another job. That was honestly, I think once I relieved myself of this fear of failure and I said, you know what, I'll just get another job and it will be a great experience, but at least I tried. Once I kind of made that, it kind of really changed the game and changed my mindset going into this. So that's one thing. The second thing I would give as advice, try to have business, going in and building demand and keeping a pipeline, regardless of whatever business you're in, is part of your job as an owner or, until you can afford to have a sales team. So ensuring that you always have, kind of that demand, even before you start. So before I started, I literally had a pipeline of business. I already had clients I had been working with because I had reached out to some people and they had some work for me. So I walked into launching my company with business coming in the door. So that would be the second thing I would say. And the third thing I would say, know how to distinguish profit or sales revenue activities versus thought leadership and all types of indirect sales activities. being able to distinguish that is also important. So you can be doing a lot of stuff and your time is precious and you have a lot of competing priorities. At the end of the day, are the activities you're doing actually bringing in revenue? Not supporting revenue, actually bringing it in. And once you kind of make that distinction and you clear your schedule and make sure you're doing more revenue generating stuff than just, development stuff on your business, that's also a really important lens when you're first getting started. So I've got so many others, but those would be my top 3.
Yeah, well, those are certainly some great tips and advice. I do see Colette has asked some questions. So first, going back to that business plan, you mentioned that it doesn't have to be 21 pages. What template did you use for your business plan?
I think I just Googled literally the word like consulting firm business plan. And I saw an outline and I just took those headers and I literally created bullet points. So I created bullet points on my target market, on my strategy, on my marketing plan, my resource plan. So it was really, kind of the basics, even like finance. So I literally took each of the sections and created bullets. And that was really the beginning of my plan.
Great. Love technology these days.
Yes.
And during the whole process, who gave you guidance?
Yeah, great question. So luckily, again, because I've been very fortunate, I was able to kind of go back through my LinkedIn account and identify individuals that actually I had used to work for, former supervisors, former allies that I had in my circle. They built multi-million-dollar consulting practices and they still own them or they've exited out of their practices. And I reached out and I had already been connected to them and stayed connected, but I told them I'm starting my business. Would they mind kind of mentoring me through this? I've never done this before. I've never started a business in this fashion. So luckily I kind of have I'd call it an unofficial and informal board of advisors, that are in different spaces. They've all run really successful businesses. And when I have an issue, I can text them, I can call them. But I always make sure that I'm really respectful of their time and I support them in the things that they do as well. So for me, that was really helpful. I think if you're thinking about starting a business and you don't have those types of mentors, you can definitely seek them out. I always say start with, LinkedIn is always amazing. Find the folks that are in the space that you want to be in and start to really become a student of their work. Start to become a student of the industry. And you start to find out like who are key players. And it's, we're all literally a second degree. They used to say we're all third degree connected to others. We're actually second, I think, with social media and the internet. So I think just really, again, being intentional about who you spend your time with and how do you really not only look for mentorship, but how do you give value back to individuals? I think that's really the best way. But you'd be surprised if you go back through your networks and people you've connected with. Sometimes it's easier to just reactivate a stagnant relationship and, sharing your news and creating that. So don't be afraid to reach back out to people that, you used to work with in the past or people you admired and, you connected, but you didn't, for whatever reason, stay in touch. Starting a business is kind of like having a child. It's an opportunity to share with the world the great news. And usually people are willing to support you but you have to kind of put yourself out there to get that type of mentorship.
Great. Well, feel free to, add another question, but, you had said, obviously starting out, it was just yourself. But that's no longer the case. So at what point did you decide to actually bring on additional people and kind of what was that process like?
I knew my barometer, I have a 2-year-old son now, and my barometer for when I need to, increase my capacity is when I don't have time to try to put him down to sleep. I don't have time to play with him. I don't have time to see him on the weekends. Once I start to have those types of weeks, I know I need to do something differently. Honestly, that's really my barometer. usually I'm able to work through my days, but when it's his time, it's his time. When it's my family's time, it's my family's time. So once I start to see that, that's my cue that I need to do something different. So I usually kind of, I use a very systemic approach, but I look at what's on my plate and what are the things that are eating up my time that I can really give to someone else. And how do I give it to that individual? Do I need someone that's up and running that can just take it and run with it? Do I need someone that I have the time to train them up, to learn? I've got time to coach. Or is it something that I just need to outsource to a vendor entirely and just take that on as the model? So for me, it really depends on what's happening. But I realized I had to start doing that pretty soon, after I think about the first 6 months of my business. I ended up having to bring in some interns. So don't be afraid to bring in interns. I had 2 business school interns that were amazing, that really helped me kind of create the kind of the grounding that I needed to scale. And I now have a combination of, I have some full-time employees on my team, but I also still work with contractors. We still have interns. So I have a hybrid kind of team model now. So again, don't be afraid. Don't try to do everything, because you will in the beginning, and that's okay. Know what you're really good at, and know what you can pass off to others, and know where you need to focus your time. I think that's the biggest thing. I think once you conquer your calendar, you've conquered your business. So I'd really recommend. I can't say that enough. How important having the right people, but also having the systems in place to make sure that they can grow and you can kind of develop them along the way.
Great. Suzanne just asked, what are your favorite and least favorite things about the work that you do?
My favorite things, I'll start with that. I think my favorite things is really when I see an executive have a light bulb moment, whether that's in a training or whatever that is, but it's when they have a moment and you can see that they get it. They understand what the impact of not changing is going to do to their business. They understand maybe their own lived experiences. They understand and can own their own biases. So I love those light bulb moments, because that's when you see the change actually happening in real time. I think that's very gratifying for me. I would say the thing that I hate, I wouldn't say hate, but the thing that one of the activities that is really tough for me is actually saying no. I've had to say no a lot to whether it's potential clients, it's potential employees. But I think just staying focused and staying intentional and making sure to know the difference between being nice and being effective and being firm on staying focused, in terms of what my accomplishment, my goals are, and what I can and cannot do. Even if there's things that I want to do, but again, can I do this now? Is this going to allow me to see my son go to sleep at night? I have to ask myself these types of filter questions to make sure I stay focused. So those are things I would say, yeah.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. We are at time, so I just want to thank you so much for opening up about your experience, providing all of this wonderful tips and knowledge and advice. So thank you, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you, Christie, and on this wonderful event with Get Connected and Boston Magazine. And I hope everyone enjoys the fitness session after this. So thank you all.
Thank you.